In 1947, a man named Preston Tucker announced that he was going to build the safest, most advanced automobile in America. He would use a factory in Chicago, the largest single-floor industrial building in the world at the time. He had a design. He had engineers. He had investors. He had a car that, on paper, was unlike anything Detroit was producing. Within 2 years, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission had charged him with securities fraud. Within 3 years, his company was bankrupt, his factory had been seized, and he was standing trial in federal court. He was acquitted of every single charge. It made no difference. Tucker Corporation was gone. The tooling was destroyed. The workers were dismissed. Preston Tucker died of cancer 18 months after the verdict. He was 53 years old. 47 of the 51 Tucker 48s ever built survive today. Each one is worth between $2 and $3 million. This is the story of what Preston Tucker built, why it mattered, who was threatened by it, and what happened next. Judge for yourself. Preston Tucker. Preston Tucker was not a conventional figure in the automotive industry. He had not risen through the engineering departments of the established manufacturers. He had not spent decades learning the economics of mass production. He was an entrepreneur, a salesman and a dreamer in roughly equal measure, with enough mechanical knowledge to understand what he wanted and enough charisma to persuade other people to help him build it. He had spent the war years developing innovative vehicles for the military and had emerged from that experience convinced that the American car industry had become complacent. The big three, Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, had not built a genuinely new car since before the war. They were selling updated pre-war designs to a public hungry for anything new. Tucker believed there was an opportunity, not just a commercial opportunity, but something close to a moral one. American soldiers had come home from a war. They deserved something better than what Detroit was offering. His pitch to investors was bold: a rear-engine car, safer and more stable than front-engine designs, a padded dashboard to protect occupants in a crash, a windshield designed to pop out in a collision rather than shatter inward, a center headlight mounted on the steering column that turned with the wheel, illuminating the road around corners, a safety passenger compartment, a structural cage within the body designed to protect occupants in a side impact. These were not marketing claims, these were engineering features. And every single one of them would become standard in American cars, not in 1948, but eventually. Some of them took 20 years. The Tucker 48. The Tucker 48. The name came from the year of production, and the car's designation was genuinely extraordinary for 1948. The engine was a modified aircraft engine, a 335 cubic inch flat six originally designed for helicopter use, converted to automotive application and producing 166 horsepower. It was mounted in the rear of the car, ahead of the rear axle, a configuration that provided better weight distribution and handling than the front-engine, rear-drive layout used by every American manufacturer at the time. The suspension was fully independent at all four corners, another rarity in American production cars of the era. The body was designed by Alex Tremulis, a stylist who had worked on some of the most advanced aircraft designs of the war years. The result was a car with a low, wide stance and a streamlined profile that looked like the 1950s had arrived a decade early. Other 1948 cars looked like boxes with chrome attached. The Tucker looked like it had been designed by someone who understood aerodynamics. The interior featured the padded dashboard that Tucker had promised, a genuine safety innovation at a time when American car interiors were unpadded metal surfaces that killed occupants in relatively minor accidents. The windshield was a single piece of curved safety glass designed to pop free of its mounting in a severe impact. The safety cell, the reinforced passenger compartment, was built to withstand a rollover. Road tests conducted on the early prototypes produced impressive results. The Tucker 48 was faster than any comparably priced American car. The handling was more composed. The brakes were more effective. It was, by any objective measure, a better car than what Detroit was selling, and Detroit noticed. Detroit takes notice. The established automobile industry in 1947 and 1948 was not a welcoming environment for competition. The big three, Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, had rebuilt their manufacturing capacity after the war and were selling cars as fast as they could build them into a market starved of new products. Their position was strong, their profits were healthy, and their relationships with the politicians and regulators of Washington were extensive and well cultivated. A new entrant to the market, one that was explicitly promising to outperform their products on safety, innovation, and value, was not something they viewed with equanimity. Tucker's factory in Chicago was a former military aircraft plant. It was enormous. If Tucker could get his production running at anywhere near the facility's theoretical capacity, he would not be a niche manufacturer, he would be a serious competitor. The question of whether the established automotive industry actively worked to destroy Tucker Corporation, or whether the government's investigation was an independently initiated response to genuine securities concerns, has been debated for over 70 years. What is established by the historical record is a sequence of events. Senator Homer Ferguson of Michigan, the state that housed all three of Detroit's major manufacturers, began raising questions about Tucker Corporation in Senate committee sessions. Michigan's sitting senator, acting as a de facto investigator of a company that was threatening Michigan's most powerful industry, a Securities and Exchange Commission investigation was launched. Tucker's plant was inspected and his records were subpoenaed. Stories began appearing in the press, some of them accurate, some of them not, questioning Tucker's financing and his ability to deliver on his promises. And then, in June 1948, before Tucker Corporation had completed its production run, the SEC froze the company's assets. Production stopped. The factory fell silent. 51 cars had been completed. The features ahead of their time. Consider the timeline. The padded dashboard Tucker included as standard in 1948 did not become a federal requirement in American cars until 1968, 20 years later. The safety windshield, designed to pop free rather than shatter inward, anticipated safety standards that weren't legislated until the 1960s. The fully independent suspension that Tucker considered essential was not standard on American cars until the 1980s in most cases. The rear engine and improved weight distribution anticipated the engineering philosophy that would produce the Porsche 911, the Volkswagen Beetle's success, and eventually the shift in the entire industry's understanding of vehicle dynamics. The center headlight that turned with the steering wheel, illuminating the actual direction of travel rather than straight ahead, was patented in various forms by other manufacturers in the 1960s and began appearing on production cars in the 1980s. Citroën used a similar system on the DS as early as 1955. Preston Tucker, working from a converted aircraft factory in Chicago with limited resources, had engineered a car that was 20 years ahead of the industry's standard practice, and the industry had 20 years of warning to catch up before anyone could say so publicly. The fraud charges. The fraud charges against Tucker and 7 co-defendants centered on allegations that Tucker had misled investors about the state of the company's development and finances. Specifically, prosecutors argued that Tucker had oversold the car's readiness for production, had misused funds raised from investors and dealers, and had made representations about the car's specifications that were inaccurate or misleading. Some of these allegations had a basis in fact. Tucker Corporation's finances were genuinely chaotic. Preston Tucker was an optimist whose public statements regularly outran the company's actual state of readiness. The gap between what Tucker promised publicly and what the company could deliver was real. Whether that gap constituted fraud or simply the kind of optimistic overstatement that characterizes almost every ambitious startup in every industry was the question the trial would ultimately have to answer. Tucker maintained throughout that the prosecution was not about securities law. It was about the threat his car represented to the established manufacturers and the political connections that allowed that threat to be addressed through regulatory rather than commercial competition. He named names. He accused Michigan politicians directly. He made enemies. The trial began in Chicago in October 1948. It lasted 4 months. The trial. The Tucker trial attracted national attention. The story had everything that American audiences found compelling: An underdog inventor battling the corporate establishment, accusations of political corruption at the highest levels, and a product that many people who had seen it genuinely believed was better than what Detroit was selling. Tucker used the trial as a platform. He spoke directly and emotionally about his belief in what he had built and his conviction that the prosecution was politically motivated. He brought character witnesses who testified to his integrity. He presented evidence that the Tucker 48 was a genuine functional automobile, not a fraud, but a real car. The prosecution presented evidence of financial irregularities. The gap between Tucker's public statements and the company's internal records was real and was presented in detail. The jury deliberated, and on January 22, 1950, Tucker and all 7 co-defendants were acquitted on all counts, not one conviction on any charge against any defendant. Preston Tucker walked out of the federal courthouse in Chicago a free man. His company had been bankrupt since 1949. His factory had been seized. His tooling had been scrapped. The workforce he had assembled was dispersed. He was acquitted of every charge, and it meant nothing. He was acquitted, and it meant nothing. The 51 survivors. Of the 51 Tucker 48s built, 47 are known to survive today. This survival rate is extraordinary, over 90% of a production run from 1948. It reflects the fact that from the moment the company collapsed, people understood that these cars were historically significant. They were preserved not because they were valuable in 1950. Tucker 48s could be purchased for a few $1,000s through the 1950s and 1960s, but because the people who owned them understood what they represented. The cars are scattered across museums and private collections across America and beyond. The Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn has one. The National Automobile Museum in Reno has one. Several are in private collections that rotate through the major auction houses when they come to market. The condition varies considerably. Some have been meticulously restored to original specification. Some are survivors, unrestored in original condition, showing the patina of 70+ years. Some were modified over the decades and have been partially demodified back toward original. Each one is documented. The Tucker Automobile Club of America maintains detailed records of every known surviving car, chassis numbers, histories, current ownership where known, condition assessments. The community around Tucker 48s is small but extraordinarily dedicated. These are not people who merely own unusual classic cars. They are custodians of evidence. Value today. The market for Tucker 48s is unlike almost any other collector car segment. Because only 47 cars exist, and because the ownership community is close-knit and well-documented, Tucker 48s rarely come to market. When they do, the prices reflect both the rarity and the historical weight. In 2012, a Tucker 48 in good original condition sold at Barrett-Jackson for $2,910,000. In 2020, a Tucker 48 with exceptional documented history and largely original bodywork sold privately for an undisclosed price that multiple sources in the collector community estimated at well over $3 million. The range for a Tucker 48 at auction today: $2 million to $3.5 million. For exceptional examples with documented history or museum provenance, potentially beyond that. For a car that cost approximately $2,450 new in 1948. For a car that the United States government tried to classify as a fraud. For a car that its creator did not live to see properly appreciated. Preston Tucker died in December 1956, lung cancer. He was 53 years old. He had spent his final years attempting to put together financing for a new car project in Brazil. It never came together. He died knowing he had been acquitted. He never knew what his cars would eventually be worth. He never saw the recognition that came later. The Francis Ford Coppola film in 1988, the serious historical reassessment of his case, the collector values that validated everything he had claimed about what he had built. The Tucker 48 story does not have a clean ending. Tucker was acquitted, but his company was already gone. His car was ahead of its time, but his time ran out before the world caught up. The features that defined his car became industry standard, but not until after the men who made his life difficult had retired and died and been largely forgotten. What remains are 47 cars, each one a document. Evidence that in 1948, one man with limited resources and unlimited ambition built something that the most powerful industrial companies in America chose to destroy rather than compete with. Whether that was justice or injustice, you have the facts. You decide. Thank you for being at the Vault Motors. Subscribe for new stories every Tuesday and Friday. The next vault opens Tuesday.